Hello, my name is Jeffrey Watson,
And I'm Ethan Edwards.
and this is the Ridge Podcast.
So hello everyone. This episode of the podcast has been recorded last week,
Yeah.
but me and Ethan are indisposed currently as we're on a grand adventure
To Washington, D.C.
Our nation's capital, our great nation's capital. We said that every few weeks we want to do a book review. And that's what this episode is going to be. And we have some more book reviews planned out in the coming weeks, but this week we're going to be discussing Ray Bradbury's
Fahrenheit 451.
Fahrenheit 451.
And you'll have to forgive us. We don't have an interview like we would normally. The goal is going to be that we have interviews every week, and then we have a book review episode
At least once a month.
once a month, and that'll be sometime during the month. We haven't really figured that out yet. But because we have such a busy week next week, going to DC and everything, we decided that we would record this one ahead of time and just post it instead of an interview.
But we are apologetic, and we hope that you'll stick around because we do have some very exciting interviews coming up. I won't say it now,
Yeah.
but we have a lineup of some really interesting people that are going to come on, and I hope it'll be a real treat.
Yeah.
But to get into the book review, a little bit of story how we both got into the book or how we got exposed to the book. I mean, I had heard about it for years.
Yeah.
I'd actually bought my copy of the book 2 years ago from a little store in Galax.
I didn't realize that.
And I had it, and I was going to read it, and I just never got to it. And Ethan started reading it, and he said, there's no reason why you're not going to pick it up. He said, you can read it one day. I looked at it, I said, absolutely, I can read this in one day, and I did. And I really, really enjoyed it.
Me too.
How did you get exposed to it, Ethan?
Like I mentioned in the first episode, I want to read some more classic literature, right?
Absolutely.
And I read 1984, loved it. So I was like, okay, Fahrenheit 451 is the natural next step. So I picked up the 60th anniversary edition from the Carroll County Public Library, and I didn't pick it up for a few weeks, and I regret doing that. But I saw that it had 250 pages, and like that's not a big deal, right? But I was busy when I picked it up, and I was reading other things, so it took me a few weeks, right?
Yeah, Ethan reads like 5 books at one time.
Yeah, that's for another day though. So I start reading it, and I get to like page 140, right? And then I just put it down, right? Because it's like, I have 100 more pages to read. Like I was studying for a test, a certification test, when I reached that point. So I put it down to study for the test, right? Well, I pick it up the day after I take my certification test and I pass it. And 10 pages later, I'm done. What? Like, I see
It ends kind of abruptly.
Yeah, it ends very abruptly.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
And I finish it, and I'm like, wait, I'm on page 150. Yeah, this book has 250 pages. Where it turns out the 60th anniversary edition, I think you have it too, right?
No, I have the 50th anniversary edition.
Okay.
But it still has it in the back of the book. Afterward.
Okay. Well, the first 150 pages are the book, but the next 100 pages are commentary on the original work, which is very interesting. It includes stories about how Bradbury read the book, why, bit of gives an insight into the philosophical element of why a book like this is needed.
And he actually he didn't want to touch the work afterwards because he wanted to remain original to it. He wanted to remain in its original form, but he wrote the play to the novel. And where he actually added scenes, and he explains those scenes in the afterward. And he also does like a question and answer, like people sending questions and he answered them. It's really fascinating. Did you read it?
I read a good bit of the commentary. I didn't read all of it though, but I think it's really fitting that he didn't want to alter the original work. Many times during the book, and this episode will contain spoilers, by the way, so tread lightly.
Tread lightly on it.
But many times during the book, Guy, the main character of the plot, he mentions like biblical books of the Bible, right? And Shakespearean works, classic literature, right? That we all know, love, or maybe hate, depending on who you are.
And you can tell Bradbury is he's a fan of literature.
Yeah, he is. But they talk about how people memorize the books in full, and that's how the knowledge lives on. Because all the books are burned, right? That's a major plot point in the story. And it makes me wonder how much of the original form is lost through memorization.
Yeah.
And I respect that he didn't want to alter the original work as to change it and potentially lose some of the authenticity through changing it.
Yeah, like he in one interesting scene, he says, this man here is the Book of Job. And this man here is the Great Gatsby. Not the Great Gatsby. I'm paraphrasing here.
I think it's Great Gatsby.
Yeah, but the people were the books in the end. But
Yeah.
that's towards the end of the story.
Yeah.
I think we need to go back and focus on the beginning. So the book starts out with a guy named Guy Montag, and he is a fireman.
Yeah.
And it's not the type of fireman that you're thinking of.
Yeah.
These people burn books.
Yeah. They receive a call of a
People,
criminal who
the
owns
people
books.
owns books.
Yeah.
And they go and they burn their house down. And, I'm not going to get too political here, but I think it is a study on council culture too, on appeasement. Because they talk about this society where they banned books because there were too many points of view. So it got people to think. And then they did say, one book was written by Christians and one book was written by Jewish people and one book was written
Secular
by Buddhists.
people.
Yeah, and they all clashed with each other and it caused issues. So they just banned everything. And nobody had that individuality anymore.
No one could think.
And they couldn't think. And that's what they were trying to attack is people's ability to critically think. So guys live in this society that's very superficial. People are all about
The parlor.
yeah, like they have these big TV screens and they have it's so fake, and they drive 90 miles an hour and they try to hit people with their cars
And the billboards
Yeah.
are miles
Massive.
long so that people can pay attention to them.
they're just so
It's
fake.
It's odd. It's
yeah,
fake.
and
It's
it's plastic. It's very superficial. Well, he's walking home one day, and he stopped. I forget her name. Is it Clarice?
I think it might be Clarice.
It's this young girl stops him, and she's different. She notices things like the autumn leaves, and Ray Bradbury is a big fan of the autumn. He tries to put in a lot of his works, but she's a big fan of the autumn leaves, and she notices the rain, and the dew on the yard, and she notices things that people in society do not notice anymore. Because they're just so caught up in their own superficial worlds, they don't take the time to notice these things. And she really opens his eyes to, the way it used to be, and that he can have something more than what his world gave him. So this gets him thinking, and he's the enforcer of this really society.
Yeah.
He's enforcing this doctrine that this government has instituted. So, he's the enforcer. He's the arm. He has the fist, and so he experiences it firsthand. It's kind of a dramatic turn for him.
Yeah, and he starts out the story loving the sensation of burning books,
Yeah,
the smell of the gas, and then throughout the story, he witnesses someone kill themselves to try to protect their books, and that has a profound impact on him. And he takes a book that he was supposed to burn, and he goes home and he tries to read it, and it doesn't make any sense to him. And he just thinks and thinks and thinks, and he thinks so much that he gets sick. He's bedridden, and the fire captain comes and talks to him, and the fire captain knows.
He knows something because he said most firefighters do go through that moment where they are tempted by the books. And I think we skipped over a key point in the story. Guy's wife.
Yeah. So something that was really interesting to me was Guy asked Mildred, was that her name?
Mildred. He asked her where they met.
Where they met, and neither of them could give an answer. No. And that's just crazy to me. Like, if I married someone, surely I would remember where we met.
And they weren't really in even relationships. Was obsessed with other things.
I believe they slept in separate beds too. Which like
and
if that's your thing, then okay. But
and the society is very abusive on substances too. One night she had an overdose.
Yeah, she had an overdose, and then the next day she doesn't even know.
She doesn't remember, and these people came in, and it was a routine. They did it every night.
Yeah, the people who
they pumped her stomach basically,
and then they replaced her blood too.
Yeah,
because they said her blood was like contaminated. The people said that they had another call, and they had to go.
So this society is so emotionless and non-personal.
Yeah,
it's kind of scary. It's not a horror novel, but it's scary.
Yeah,
It's
it's like I call it 1984. It's a dystopian horror.
yeah.
I don't know if that's a coined term or even a popular one, but I like to use it.
But yeah, so his wife, I mean, and they were living this very, non-meaningful existence together. And as Guy starts to realize his eyes are open, he starts to realize, that he hasn't been living life, and he sees Mildred in a whole different light after he realizes after his interaction with Clarice, who dies. She goes disappeared.
Well, we never find out if she dies, but
she disappears.
She
They said in the story
disappears.
she's hit by a car.
hit by a car. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, in the afterward, in the play, Ray Bradbury, he explores some scenes where she actually came back at the end.
And I was expecting that.
Yeah.
I was expecting her to disappear, and then after the bombs were dropped, for Guy to meet her on the train tracks and them to serendipitously meet each other again.
So this kind of all plays into his dealings with his wife and his interaction with the lady who killed herself for the books and his exposure to the books. This all leads into him. He's kind of, the song "Losing My Religion."
Yeah.
He's kind of losing his meaning.
The firefighting.
I mean,
dogma.
yeah, he's losing his his livelihood, and he's realizing that all the things that he thought for years weren't true.
Yeah.
So he's going through this crisis, and he decides that and he's interesting enough. He had been collecting books for a few years. He has a few books that he kind of stored away. He didn't know really why he stored them away, but he did.
Yeah.
So he decided that he felt just sick almost. He wasn't sick, but he something wasn't right. So he decided he was going to stay home and read the books that day. Well, his boss suspected him, Betty, and he came by and he gave him 24 hours to read it and decide that that it was a bunch of crap and to give it up.
And we're overlooking a pretty important character here. An old professor that he'd met.
Well, that actually happens later on in the story.
Well, yeah, but I was gonna segue into it. But yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ethan.
It's okay.
I apologize.
It's okay.
Hopefully he will forgive me.
It's okay. But he meets the professor a few years before the events of the story take place, and as he's reading these books, and Beatty comes, and after his interaction with Beatty, he remembers the professor, and he remembers that he had his information stored in a file, so he decides to go meet with the professor, and the professor is obviously apprehensive at first because here's a firefighter coming to me, an old English professor.
And they had met at a chess match earlier on, and Guy had taken his name and put it in a file to report him, but he never did.
Yeah.
But yeah, so all these things really happened in like a short period of time for a Guy, and so he has this encounter with Betty. Well, after this, he locks himself in his house with his wife, and they don't go anywhere. And Betty, he's very paranoid because of the
hound.
The hound. The
Yeah.
hound is it's kind of like an enforcer, a mechanical beast that can sniff out.
It said amino acids, which is like a bit of a pseudoscience back in the 50s. The book was published in 1953, but it says you could code an amino acid into the hound, and it would remember who you are, and it would be able to sniff you out. So that's not strictly scientifically correct.
No, but it's a very important part of the story because it's kind of like a overhanging threat, and it kind of suspects a Guy of treachery.
Yeah, at the beginning of the book, it
sniffs him.
Yeah, it takes its
needle.
Basically drug needle out, right?
That paralyzes the person.
Yeah, and it haunts Guy, and Guy is so scared that he climbs up the fire pole.
So Guy's having this mental breakdown almost, and he locks his wife in there, and he cut off the parlor walls, which is like these big screens that she's obsessed with. There's like big TV screens everywhere. Yeah. And it's like a hyper connection with everybody. So he cuts off those, and she's like lost. She don't know what to do. Yeah. She's bored out of her mind. And they try to read together, and she's flipping out, and she don't know what to do.
She says it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the hound comes, and it doesn't get in, but it suspects him, and he knows it's a threat. So,
and I don't believe it ever explicitly says it's the hound until later in the story, but
you know what it is.
You know what it is. Point. It's very eerie.
Yeah. So he runs out of the house later, and he's fed up with her. Mm-hmm. He leaves, and he decides that he's going to go in and talk to Faber.
Mm-hmm. Faber, yeah, the professor.
The professor about this book, and at first he goes to Faber's house, and it's totally different than his.
A few $100s too, because Guy's objective was to reprint the books.
Yeah, because
And-
he's having this kind of epiphany. Here he's gonna break the mold of what these people have become.
I believe he takes a copy of the Bible.
Yeah.
With him too.
Yeah, because he hid the books before he left because he knew that his wife would try to destroy them.
Yeah.
So he goes to Faber's house, and they talk, and then they formulate their plan. And, he tells them of a time when things were different. And Faber was a college professor. And, he talks about a time when education was valued and when people were different. And they had differences, but they talked about their differences, and they discussed them.
Now no one's different.
And people could have rational thought. And now no one's different. Everybody's the exact same. And the people are like robots. And they formulate these plans to, almost attack these firefighters' households, kind of change the status quo of what's happening.
Yeah. Those plans never come into...
No, not really. But Faber does give him almost like a Bluetooth headset.
Yeah.
It's kind of advanced for this
So
age.
while people were not able to be in their parlor watching TV or the radio program or whatever it was, they had these earpieces that worked wherever they went, and it was kind of the parlor, but without the video element of it, so they could still hear things. And Faber gave Guy one of these devices that looked very similar, but it allowed two-way communication between Guy and Faber, so they
hear
could
each
communicate, and it wasn't suspicious because it looked like something everyone else was wearing.
And while Guy was wearing it, Faber was actually reading him books.
Yeah.
And it kind of opened Guy's eyes again. So Guy was really enthusiastic after he left. He was nervous, but he was enthusiastic. And he came back home. And at this point, the parlor was on again, the big TV walls. They were on, and Mildred her friends were over. And her friends were, there was one wife was a firefighter, the wife of a firefighter.
I think so.
I'm thinking. But they were very superficial, just like her, like everybody.
Yeah. And Guy would ask them, like, what are you watching?
Yeah, and they don't
the,
know.
the family.
The family, and they don't even know who they're
Yeah,
watching.
what are they talking about? Oh, things.
Yeah, and they always have these things in their ears that are like making noises and stuff and random talking. They don't know what they're just having something.
It's white noise.
Yeah, and they're going around and they're picking stuff up, and they don't know what they're doing. They're just picking stuff up and moving them just because. And that was really scary when I read it. Because the other day, ever since I put kind of social media down, sometimes when I get bored, I was just looking on my phone. I was just clicking stuff.
Yeah.
So what am I doing? I'm doing just what they said in the story.
I think Ray was on the nose.
Yeah.
That's exactly like people using TikTok nowadays. They're bored.
It's
they
boom, boom,
they open
boom,
up
boom,
TikTok.
boom.
10-second video.
Yeah.
10-second
Boom,
video.
boom,
10-second
boom.
video. 10-second video.
No thought required.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's kind of like what we're doing today. And it's not to that point at all.
Yeah.
But there is some...
And TikTok isn't all evil, right?
No,
Like,
I mean,
some
there's
interesting conversations can be had.
Yeah, but I think, there's a lot of bad to it, too.
There is.
A lot of... and there's a lot of national reasons why I think TikTok... I don't want to get too into this, but...
We won't, yeah.
Yeah, but why things could be changing with that application. But so yeah, a guy goes home and they're just all there and they're doing their thing. Well, he snaps. He loses and he comes out and he starts reading poetry to them.
Yeah. And they just have a breakdown. They start crying.
They start crying. They don't know it and they think he's terrible. And eventually Mildred kind of saves him here, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
She plays it off as...
She's trying to save her own skin, though.
At first I thought she might be trying to save their marriage. She might be coming around to it, but she's not. Yeah. She's just protecting herself.
She's protecting the parlor,
Yeah.
her source of entertainment.
Yeah, and she burns the book. Well, she helps Guy burn the book in front of everybody. And she says it's just a once-a-year thing where he comes out and shows everybody that...
To show people how ridiculous books are.
Yeah, how ridiculous it is. So, at this point, Guy, him and Mildred have a big argument afterwards. Mm-hmm. And,
He...
Say what?
Go ahead.
So they have a big argument. And I think another important point of the story is throughout the novel, they're talking about this war that could be starting at any moment.
Yeah.
And everybody's really concerned about it. They're all kind of...
Because they're all plugged into the parlor. The parlor says, oh, everything will be fine.
Everything's fine. And they're talking about this war, and everybody's like, okay, whatever. We're too busy for this right now. And they're constantly hear military planes going over the sky. And so this overhanging threat throughout the story. But, after this, Guy he's kind of lost. He's going through a crisis. Well, he decides he's going to go back to work. And
he takes a book with him, too.
I'm not missing anything here, am I?
No, he takes a book.
Takes a book with him.
Because
he wants to kind of.
Beatty said he had like the 24 hours to decide, right? So he takes the book
Yeah.
to turn it in, right? His supposedly only book, right?
Mm-hmm. So he turns it in, and they go to the fire station when they get a call.
Yeah, well, Beatty, I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Beatty throws the book away without even looking at the title,
Mm-hmm.
right? And guy's like, okay, right? He couldn't possibly know, right?
Yeah.
And then they're playing a game of poker, and then they get a call.
Yeah.
And guy's like,
when they rush out, yeah.
Guy's like, get the call, like, right? We gotta go.
Yeah.
And Beatty's like, this one can wait.
Yeah. And this one guy kind of knows something's up. Well, then they go into the Salamander, which is it's kind of like their fire engine,
Yeah.
but it's like their
I think
big
it's a cool name.
kerosene like tanker. And they go on the Salamander, their kerosene tanker, and the guy's on the end. He's hanging onto the pole. When they arrive at the house, he realizes it's his house.
His house, yeah.
And Betty confronts him, and he hands him the kerosene
Flamethrower, basically.
flamethrower, and he says him to go inside and to burn his house down. At this point, he sees Mildred
Burn the books and
leaving.
burn the house.
She doesn't even look at him. She gets in, she's laughing, and she speeds off.
Yeah.
He tells him to go in and burn down the house, and he does.
Yeah.
And at this point, he's kind of being pulled back a little bit.
Because he still has favorite in his ear,
Yeah.
too.
You know, he's lighting the house on fire. And he's kind of enjoying it a little bit. He's getting a little bit of satisfaction. He's not really enjoying
He's conflicted
it.
because
he's conflicted
he
because
doesn't want to destroy the books, but there's also that primal nature that he had in them at the beginning of the book where he enjoyed burning things.
burning it into fit in. So I think this is a key turning point in the story. Well, he finishes burning down the house. And he goes out and they find the earpiece in his ear. And that's when Betty tells him that.
I believe Guy slips up and talks back to Faber.
Yeah.
And that's what gives it away.
Yeah, and Betty says that this isn't going to end well for you.
Yeah.
You burn down the house. Well, that's not it. You're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Well, he's attacking, not really attacking physically,
But verbally
assaulting
Guy.
and he's threatening him and degrading him. The guy snaps and he turns his flamethrower and burns Betty to death.
And later on in the story, Guy remarks that he thinks that he wanted to die.
Yeah.
That he let Guy kill him.
Well, people are obsessed with this in this society with danger. You know, they do all these things. They drive 90 miles an hour around curves and try to hit things. And they're obsessed with all this, like, go, 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 go. Not thinking. Not sitting down and looking at things and thinking critically.
You mentioned in one of the afterwords, it said that Beatty had a collection of his own, a book collection.
Yeah, it was actually interesting in that. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Ethan. In the afterward, Ray Bradbury said he didn't want to touch the original work, but in the play, I don't know if he put it in the play, but he talked about it, that after when Guy was sick, before they, confronted him, Betty took Guy to his house and showed him that he had his own personal library, and he used to be obsessed with books until he realized better.
Yeah.
And he kept them as a reminder, like a temptation to not go back. But yeah, so Guy kills Betty. And all the other guys, he fights the other guys, and he ends up fighting the Hound. Yeah. The Hound comes.
And the Hound gets his leg, right?
Yeah.
And then, but only his leg because he burns the rest of the Hound. And he loses leg function for a little bit, and he has to limp away from the scene of the fight. But he like peeks through houses, right? And he can see that people are watching him.
Everybody's
run.
watching him, yeah.
And he hears that they dispatched yet another Hound.
Yeah.
And they say that the Hound has never failed to capture a target. And
Well, then he doesn't know where to go, so he goes to Faber's house.
yeah, he goes to Faber's.
And he tells Faber that he's going to have to leave.
Yeah.
So, but Faber's going to leave anyway, so he's going to get out of the city. He tells Guy to run,
But
to go.
Faber wasn't going to leave until the next morning, I think.
No, because he said he was going to get on the bus and go.
Okay.
But, so Guy takes off, and he sees millions of people watching the chase. He has this interaction with these teenagers that tried to kill him. That wasn't the police, but he's barely escaping. All this bad stuff. It's all kind of going down.
It's a lot at one.
Yeah, well, Faber told him to make it to the old railroad tracks. They're long forgotten, down by the river. And nobody leaves the city anymore. And this is open country. There's farmers out there, and there's these weird types of people, these old college professors.
Vagabonds who
can. The government knows about them,
but they don't
they're so
cause a problem.
They don't care, so they just leave them out there, and they're kind of like these wayfarers that just, they're old souls, and they remember the olden times, and a lot of them were scholars, and like one guy worked at Oxford, and like his professor of sociology and stuff like that. Well, so he escapes the hounds, he dives into the river, he floats on down, and eventually he gets out, and he's in the country.
And he stumbles around for a little bit,
Yeah.
but eventually he finds a group of what nowadays you would think would be homeless people.
Yeah, but little things happen before that I think is probably the most powerful point in the whole story. The transition between, he got exposed to, thinking and to critical thinking and books and stuff, but he realized, but books are important, but they're not everything. And I think this is when he realizes that he breaks truly free from that idea of the city and society. When he first steps out of the river and he sees the stars and he smells the leaves, and he really notices things like Clarice noticed things.
Yeah, that's true too.
And so he's really having first exposure to autumn leaves, and he's smelling them for the first time, and he's noticing, the feel of the air and the look at the sky, and he finally feels free. And that's when he meets the group of people. He finds the railroad, and he meets the group of guys.
And he talks about like how he lost access to the books, right? They were burned. He had to burn them, and the guy was upset by this. But the group, I don't remember how many there were, but there was a good sized group. The group says you just have to learn to unlock your memory, and that you'd be able to remember what you had read, and then that they would teach Guy to remember whole books, so that he could share that information. And then like you said, you could meet Shakespeare, or you could meet the Great Gatsby, who lived in this town or the other.
Yeah. And so these men are the embodiment of knowledge, of books, and they're all the world has left. And that they have this whole like network of other people they know.
It's like an underground railroad.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. But at this point, they always come like these little TVs with them, so they can have some connection with what's going on. And the government had faked Guy's death. They attacked some random guy.
Random person, yeah.
So at this point, Guy's truly free.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks he's dead, and he's free from everything. And right when you think seems like everything's going to be happy and dandy, the war starts.
Yeah.
And everybody gets killed. Not the guy in his group, but the
everyone
whole,
in the city. The city is
demolished, and probably most other cities too.
Yeah. In the book, it says you can, like, a guy could see the explosion from the bomb colliding with the debris of the city, and it just getting obliterated, and how it knocked them off their feet, and
even they were so far away.
They were probably miles away, and they were disoriented by it.
And if you think about what time this book was written, too,
1950,
the Cold War, Soviet Union.
Yeah.
It was a real fear.
And after Japan,
and materialism was on the rise. You have the suburbs and everything.
It's just really interesting. And Ray Bradbury, he wrote Fahrenheit 451 in UCLA, the basement of the UCLA building. So it kind of tells you where he lives, right? California. It's just interesting. I would have loved to live in that area during the 50s and see what it was like, and see how he used themes in the book and how they compare it with society at the time.
And I'm sure there's a lot more interviews than just the afterword. I'm sure he probably goes into that more. But yeah, so everybody's killed, and he envisions Mildred. She's in a hotel room, and
she gets obliterated,
and nobody has any care in the world, and then they die.
Yeah.
And they're just wiped off the map.
And honestly, that wouldn't be the worst way to go.
I think it would be though.
But I'm saying not
physically.
Well, I'm saying being unaware of your death. I'm not saying being thoughtless would be a good way to go, but they were at peace, and then they just disappeared, right? So at least there was some mercy in that.
But wouldn't you want to kind of face the idea of death to think about what's happening?
I don't think it would matter, because afterwards you're gone.
Do you think it's a powerful? I know, but do you think it's a powerful experience for a person to be able to face their, let's say they're critically ill? Do you think it's a powerful experience for that person to be able to face it and to think about it?
I don't think you have to personally come close to death to face death. I think you can see others come close to death.
Yeah, but it has to. No, but I think to truly understand it, it has to
happen to you, and I'm sure that's true to some extent.
I mean, yeah,
but
to come to terms.
But you would have that experience, right? And then you would die a few moments later. So that experience isn't worth a whole lot.
Unless you have a year to think about that experience.
And that's true too. And they don't even have seconds to think about it. It probably didn't even register.
Yeah, it's instantaneously. They don't know what's happened.
Yeah. They probably heard a loud noise and then bam.
And they confirmed that Faber's alive. They said he was on a bus between cities. He said his destination was destroyed, and the place where he came from was destroyed too. So he's kind of in the middle. So hopefully Faber makes it out.
Meets up with the guy.
Later on we don't know, but and that's kind of where the story ends.
Yeah.
The next day they're going to go back to the city to kind of see what happened.
Guy and his group stands up from the rubble, and the book ends. The guy makes some remarks. They were kind of abstract, hard to remember.
Yeah.
Very philosophical in nature, but it just ends abruptly. And I was very surprised by this. It was odd. It was a very odd spot for a book to end. But I think leaving basically a blank canvas for the reader was a good move, because people can take it and interpret it, or they can.
It's a good story. It's a good story in itself. Just on its own, but it can be a story where you can really think about it.
Yeah. Or they could take it and misconstrue it too, which is concerning. But I haven't really read or seen anything where they have taken it and misconstrued it, turned it into something that's not.
That's their interpretation. That's what
That's
the whole
true
story's
too.
about.
But I believe that people could use it to push a certain agenda.
Well, are you saying that we should maybe burn it?
No.
That's what the whole. I got you on that one.
Funny,
That's what
you did get me. But no, I just think it's interesting how he chose to end it. It just gives you something to think about, right?
Yeah, I'm not condoning book burning whatsoever. That's
me neither. Yeah.
No, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, the book. I mean, it's a very short book. It's very impactful. I mean, you know, it's also a warning, and everybody says this. So it might sound cliche, but it is. It's a warning. It makes you really, and especially, I think, if you're younger, if you're of a younger age, you can really see this more explicitly than older people, because we are so bombarded with constant,
instant gratification.
Instant gratification, and so we see this a lot more than older people do, and so
people aren't bored nowadays.
No,
but
are they bored?
In a different way.
Yeah.
You can be bored with having time to think, right? But you can also be bored with having no time to think. And I think being bored, like sitting out on the porch, like in the book it mentions people used to just sit out on the porch and think because they had nothing to do. And the government didn't like that.
I've said that for years, haven't I not? Porch sitting is very important.
I think Clarice said this. She said that her uncle and their family sat on the porch, walked back and forth on rocking chairs, and that's why they got rocking chairs and porches, because they just sat out there and thought.
Yeah, and these people, they're not bored, but they're not fulfilled. The people that might have sat on their porches, they might have been bored, but they were fulfilled.
And these people that are constantly engaged in something, if that engagement is fulfilling, like work, something you're passionate about, then sure. But it's this mindless white noise, and it's not fulfilling at all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the goals of our podcast itself, is to break out of this whole constant mode and to experience personally what it's like to interact with people and to think critically.
I feel like a bit of a hypocrite trying to create content and make it interesting.
Yeah.
Because I'll post these clips on YouTube and on Instagram, and I feel like I'm doing what the government did with the parlors. And
the fictional government, not the U.S. government. Yeah. We'll get taken down.
No.
I'm joking.
The government in the book with the parlors.
Yeah.
I feel conflicted, and I don't know what to think.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just a really interesting, and I recommend it fully to anybody. You can read it in a day.
Yeah, I don't consider many books to be required reading, but I think Fahrenheit 451 might be on that list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that and Night by Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel. Yeah, that's another book that we could discuss. That's a very impactful book. I mean, one of them.
We've both read it, but I think it'd be worth discussing.
Yeah, one of the most impactful books I've ever read in my life.
I've read it twice, and
it's horrifying. It's sad. It's inspiring in a way.
Yeah.
To see a human persevere through that type of struggle. But it's
so jam packed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of off topic from Fahrenheit 451, but I think we should also recommend Night by Elie Wiesel to the listener, because too often, especially with the Holocaust, people look at just the numbers. the cold facts.
And then
They forget the human
the
story.
culture and the human story. Yeah.
I mean, it was a very human struggle.
These stories and bloodlines that just died.
These people were, 16, 17, 18, 19, just like we are.
Younger than that, too.
Yeah, and way younger than that. And they were regular people. They were regular people subjected to absolute horror. Yeah. And you see a very personal story of this. When Elie's writing, he's telling his story, and you see it from a very human perspective.
Yeah. And
it makes it a lot more it makes it more, I don't know if the right word for it, it makes it seem more, and it makes it hyper-realistic.
It's more touching, too.
More touching, absolutely. But yeah, everybody should check out Night, Elie Wiesel. We should definitely do a talk about that.
That's great. We curated a list a few hours ago about books we wanted to read and talk about on the podcast. And
do you have the list with you?
I don't, but we talked about East of Eden, Dope Sick.
I think we actually have a pretty good lineup, and our next book we're going to discuss is not the Great Gatsby, is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and we look to do that once a month. We're probably going to read that next week or so, but I'm a pretty good ways through it right now, but I'll give Ethan time to catch up a little bit, and then we'll come out with a review for that.
Yeah, and then we're going to read Something Wicked This Way Comes, also by Bradbury.
And then after that, I think it's The War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, that's right.
And then maybe East of Eden or Dope Sick. We're not really sure yet.
Yeah, and we can throw Night in there too.
Yeah.
We could probably do 2 in a month because Night is such a quick read.
We can have a double release week like we're recording tonight.
Yeah. Night can be read in 2 hours.
But it doesn't need to be read in 2 hours.
No. I think it's one of those texts that benefits from multiple readings, multiple quick and succinct readings, and maybe one long and detailed reading. I felt really to understand Night to its maximum, you need to know 3 languages. You need to know Yiddish/Hebrew. You need to know English, and you need to know German.
I don't think you need to know those languages because he translates it.
Well, sure, but
maybe
he uses many Hebrew and Yiddish terms in the book and German terms, and you don't need to know them, right? But I think knowing those languages,
I'm sure it
can
help. Yeah.
Just add a whole nother layer.
Well, like Ronnie
of depth
said,
to it.
With reading the Bible and stuff, I understand the culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't recommend that book enough. We read it in English class in high school, and it was.
Yeah. I read it last year, and my English class recently read it too, and I was in the fortunate position of having read it before, and I was able to provide a lot of insight both to my peers and to my teacher about interesting things that they may have missed.
Yeah.
And it was interesting.
And one cool thing about Elie Wiesel is, a lot of times in history, we're still pretty close to the Holocaust.
Yeah. It only happened.
And it was probably one of the more, if not the worst, atrocity in human history.
The fact that people allowed it to happen is just mind-blowing.
But we're still so close to it, so we still get first-hand account. And then those people are dying, like Elie Wiesel died.
It would be amazing if we could interview a Holocaust survivor.
Amazing. It would be a very touching interview.
I would almost fly out to Israel just to.
I would, yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of them in America too. But I'd also be very nervous.
Me too.
Because how do you talk about
such a hard time?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the most sensitive. I mean, but a lot. What's good? The interesting thing about those people is that they were so open to talk about it. Well, they realized
some people were,
but some people weren't.
For every one person that was open to talk about, I'm sure there were hundreds there.
Yeah, but there's a lot out there that were willing to talk about it because they realized that what they were doing for history. Yeah. Like Elie Wiesel, you read the book.
He talks about his duty that he felt to tell his story to make sure that it wouldn't happen again.
Yeah, but you read the book, but you also get to watch him in so many interviews. He's on with like Charlie Rose. He's on with Oprah, and he talks, and you can see that he actually interact with people on video too. It's really interesting.
And he, at the end of Night, at least in my copy, this might differ in other editions, and there are multiple translations of the book as well. He includes a speech that he gave in, I think, 1981, and he talks about how he felt it was his duty to the Jewish people and to the Word to tell his story, and I thought that's really powerful.
And he does it. his original story is actually over 900 pages, but he condensed the book down drastically.
That saddens me because I would like to read the full detail, and I don't know if the full story exists in English or only in Yiddish.
I don't think it does.
Because the original manuscript was originally in Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
I don't speak Yiddish or Hebrew.
Was it in Yiddish? I thought it was in.
I think it was in Yiddish.
Okay.
Because most Jews spoke Yiddish around where he lived.
But
at least from my knowledge.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I'm wrong.
But he condensed it down to make it more. I don't say it's
consumable and
to
make it appeal
point across
to more people. Yeah,
more
because
people.
he gets his point across 100%, but it's around 140 pages, right? That's much easier to digest than 900.
Yeah, but I mean, and I'm perfectly alright that this Fahrenheit 451, because it's two very powerful books turned into also talk about Elie Wiesel's Night. But yeah, for the viewer, not for the listener, Night is a person talking about the most sensitive and personal and most horrific aspects of their life personally.
Yeah, Elie talks about how his dying
extreme.
father's last words were his name, and he could have did something to prevent it.
And he did.
That's just imagine how traumatizing that would be.
Yeah, and it just. But yeah, that's two really impactful books, and Fahrenheit 451's powerful, but I think on a more human scale, Night is most definitely more powerful.
Fahrenheit presents some philosophical
aspects, some interesting aspects, but Night is powerful.
Night talks about the human condition. And suffering.
I think you can gain a lot out of both books, but Night's really special. But yeah, look out for some more exciting interviews coming up. I mean, I'm not gonna say any names right now, but we're looking at some really cool people to talk to.
Yeah, and we're trying to experiment with different time formats too. Our most recent interview with Kinsey Marshall was around 45 minutes long, and we've heard some good things about how people like the shorter format, but we as co-hosts value the longer formats more because we can really dig deep into the person.
With Ronnie and like we did last week with
my father, Jamie Edwards.
Yeah, and it was just a really interesting interview.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're just kind of working around, and like we said in the very first episode, we hope that you'll be patient with us, and
we're experimenting and learning.
We're learning, and hopefully the podcast is getting better as time goes on. I mean, I've already seen some improvements with the way we're talking.
Of course.
Interacting with each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, and look out in the next few weeks for the Grapes of Wrath, which should be. I'm sure Ethan will have some interesting views on the Grapes of Wrath personally.
I'm pretty polarized sometimes.
He is. He's got some interesting views, stuff you wouldn't normally think about, but I'm sure he's thought about it a lot. But and also one thing before we go, hopefully this will drop on Tuesday of next week.
No, Wednesday. So far we've released on every Wednesday.
Yeah.
So.
But we will be in
DC on Thursday and
DC
Friday.
on Thursday and
Saturday
Friday.
and Sunday as well.
Yeah, so we might be looking at a special episode from DC, a very short episode, of course, but something on the run, on the fly.
Yeah.
Maybe something historical. I mean, we're in our nation's capital. So.
You'll have to bear with us. It may not end up being the best quality because we're not sure what equipment we'll have access to, the type of recording conditions we'll have, but we'll try to make it interesting and mix it up, have something interesting and special.
My name is Jeffrey Watson.
And I'm Ethan Edwards.
And this is the Ridge Podcast.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Instagram, and as well as your favorite podcasting app. Our email is theridgepodcast@gmail.com, and our website is theridgepodcast.com.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.